Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone to tonight's event, a conversation with David Gessner and Dan Driscoll, Protecting the Charles River and New Environmentalism. My name is Natalie Berland. I'm the manager of sustainability here on campus, and I'm also a member of the board of the Waltham Land Trust. The Bentley University's Office of Sustainability's mission is to mobilize sustainability leadership in business by modeling sustainable operations through balancing environmental resource efficiency, financial stability, and societal benefit. Supporting sustainability teaching in the classroom with opportunities to apply this knowledge to real-world situations, and partnering with the business community to expand career opportunities in emerging markets. We're very excited to co-sponsor this event with the Waltham Land Trust. WLT was founded in 1999 by community organizers who were interested in protecting open space in the Waltham community for the benefit of future generations. They offer a variety of fun outdoor activities for all ages, including an upcoming spring equinox walk at Mount Feek Cemetery, and several stewardship events to celebrate Earth Day, which is coming up. If you're here for extra credit for a class, the sign-out sheets will be put at the back of the room towards the end of the program. Tonight, we will be hearing from two amazing gentlemen who, like the Land Trust, envisioned urban open space and natural areas as a place for recreation, habitat, and wildness. I want to remind everyone that if you'd like to purchase a copy of David's most recent books, they're for sale at the back of the room. We thank the Bentley Bookstore for bringing the books to the event. After the event, David will be available to sign copies of his book at the table at the back of the room. So, introducing tonight's two speakers will be Sonia Wadman, the program director of the Waltham Land Trust.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Natalie. And thanks to Bentley University for hosting this event. Bentley. Yay! We are very excited to welcome David Gessner and Dan Driscoll tonight. David is a creative writing professor at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and he is the author of 9 books and the recipient of several writing awards. His most recent book is All the Wild That Remains, but tonight we've asked him to mainly discuss My Green Manifesto, which was written in 2011. We're very excited to have the two gentlemen here tonight. Right now, I'd like to introduce David Gessner.
Dan and I were trying to figure out what would work best. Should he be sitting here when I'm talking, or is that going to be a little awkward? Wow. You could look kind of rapidly up as if you're really interested in Dan's you can kind of see the glare if you have our shades on. Dan's the real star tonight, and he's made it very clear during our earlier meeting on Tuesday at Emerald Necklace that I distorted facts when I wrote about him, and I should be dragged onto Oprah and chastised for my bad creative nonfiction. So I used Dan for my own purposes, which he should have understood when he went on a canoe trip with a writer. I'm going to start, and actually look at this. I think this is one of the books I have. Apparently a raccoon chewed it up. And this is the one from the month that I'll give you just a little intro to my work, and then I'm going to talk about my Green Manifesto. And it's funny, I'm so used to talking about the current book, and it's a little like a political stump speech. I don't know, I'm gauging from the demographic of the group that most people here were alive for the Gore-Bush election. And I just remember Gore, I was like, dude, I wish I could inhabit your body for like half an hour and actually talk like a living human being. You're going to lose this thing. But he kept saying that lockbox thing over and again. Like, we'll put it in, we're going to put Social Security in a lockbox, a lockbox, a lockbox. And sometimes I feel like that when I'm talking about the most recent book, because I have these set things that I do. But it's also nice, because I know what I'm going to say. Whereas an old book like tonight, I have no idea what I'm going to say. So it'll be a spontaneous at least. I started writing on Cape Cod in 1983. And this is going to sound like I'm joking, but my ambition was to be the greatest writer of all time by far. That puts a lot of pressure on you when you haven't written it all yet. It freezes up the pen considerably. And it took me a long time to kind of blast through and actually write a book. And what I wanted to do, of course, was to write a novel. Because in those days, creative nonfiction, so-called, wasn't really a contender for the crown, right? If you're Hemingway or Thomas Wolfe, you write a novel. So I sat down there on Cape Cod, and I worked on and off as a carpenter in Boston and a carpenter on Cape Cod. And I wrote these clunky, horrible novels where the characters quoted Thoreau to each other. And it was just awful. And they got, and I didn't show them to anybody either. That's another lesson if you want to be a writer. Don't do that. Don't hide your work. But gradually during my 20s, I started to manage to produce one finished clunky novel. We all know the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing. You start to get a little better. And I got in my 30th year, I found out I had testicular cancer. I was living in Worcester, and I moved to Colorado, where I went into a writing program. And it was beautiful, I said the other night, to be airlifted from Worcester to Boulder. It was like, it's a Massachusetts audience, that's all I need to say. And I had a professor who said, look, your fiction is autobiographical, why don't you cut to the chase and write nonfiction? So I started to write a book about Cape Cod called The Wild Rain Place. The full quote is, it is a wild rain place and there's no flattery in it. It's a Thoreau quote that applied to the Cape in winter, I thought, but also applied to my blunt businessman dad, who during that year was dying at my age right now of lung cancer. And so it turned into this kind of intense memoir where near the end he's under chemo and he's kind of not said a coherent thing for 2 weeks, and I'm in the room with him scribbling down notes, and he suddenly alertly looks at me and says, make sure you get the facts down. And my first book started as kind of a nature-y Cape Cod book, and it turned into this memoir of my dad's death. And I wrote it about Cape Cod in Colorado. And to my chagrin, everybody called it a nature book. And I was like, damn it, it's not a nature book. It's a book about life and death, and my father-son relationship. But anyway, they were reviewing it, so that was okay. So then it wouldn't do for a Cape Cod nature writer to be living in Colorado. And I moved back to Cape Cod, where I instantly set to writing a book, a memoir about Colorado. So there was a pattern building here, of being where you're not kind of. And it came out. I thought it was about regionalism. I said the other night, it was amazing to me. I'd lived my whole life in New England. I didn't realize I was oppressed by SAT scores at Ivy League colleges and the driving we had to do to just get over here. And I got to Colorado and it was like, woohoo! I'm free. I've met my own people in my tribe. They're outside all the time. They're climbing mountains. So I thought I'd written this great book about regionalism, and they called it a nature book. So now I'm really pissed off, and I write a book called Sick of Nature, which is going to be my declaration of independence from the nature genre. And I don't have it with me, but it basically starts, I am sick of nature. I am sick of trees, birds, the beach. Every day I go up to the post office and the kids look at me and say, Daddy, why is that man wearing pajamas? And when I'm not in those sweats writing my book, I'm dressed in the clothing of an English bird watcher. And so really what I was sick of was the kind of oppression of the nature genre and the kind of way of delighting in the birding and the sweet kind of esoteric nature language. And I wanted to bust out of that. But the irony of writing that book was I was asked by a large press to do a real nature book, which which led to a book called Return of the Osprey, which ends, I will stay on Cape Cod forever, which is how I got my job in North Carolina. Some professors read it and asked me to come down here. So as you see, I was very bad at the rub. I wasn't good at this. I was better in movement than I was settling in one place. Which leads me to the book. You know, Dan and I played Ultimate Frisbee together. That's how we met. And one night, I guess, having beers afterward, I asked him about what he did. And it turned into this notion that we could paddle the Charles River together. And that I could write about him as kind of a new environmentalist, more in my school of environmentalism. Not that the world is doomed, panic attack, anxiety environmentalism that I've grown so weary of, but kind of hardier, not goofy. I use that word, poor Dan, he got written about by me. But like this more embracive, outgoing environmentalism. So we set out to paddle the Charles. Now, as a rule of thumb, I don't read from my books. And the reason for that is my wife's a novelist. And she said we've long been trained when we're read to go to sleep. I'm more of a talker usually than a reader. But I am going to read a couple things here because I don't remember what the book's about. And because I think it sets the tone for a couple of the adventures that Dan and I went on. We are paddling our rock-battered canoe down a particularly stunning section of the river, twisting between steep granite walls and overhanging trees as we travel toward the hidden city at river's end. Over the past hours, we've heard coyotes howl and watched deer wade, observed a sharp-shinned hawk swoop into the canopy, swallows cut above the water in front of us, kingfishers ratchet past, and toasted with beers to congratulate ourselves after an exhilarating ride through the rapids. If I squint, I can imagine myself on a great and wild river, the Amazon or Congo, or at least the Colorado, and can imagine the man steering the canoe behind me as an epic adventurer, Teddy Roosevelt say, hurtling down the river of death. The truth is slightly less glamorous. The truth is, this isn't the Amazon, but the Charles, a name that conjures up images less adventurous and wild than fancy in its feet, not to mention domesticated and decided to be British, and that the hidden city ahead is known in the native tongue as Boston. What's more, the dwellings we will soon pass will not be primitive huts, but super stop and shops, and the Homo sapiens we'll encounter downriver will not be headhunters, but Harvard students. And if I'm perfectly honest, the fearless leader in the stern isn't Teddy R., but a state worker named Dan Driscoll, who I once played some Ultimate Frisbee with, and whom we referred to in those days as Danimal. I think that I'll just skip ahead. As Dan paddles, he describes what he calls his radical idea, that being environmental isn't about education or politics. It's about what Thoreau called contact, falling in love with something, a place, an animal, and then fighting for it. When I grew up in Newton, we always had our butts dragged out to Lincoln to learn about nature. The way I look at it, if one kid walks into his own backyard and has contact with nature, then maybe we will do something. Then maybe he will do something. Maybe he'll be inspired to fight for the place. Maybe he'll be the next John Muir. He pauses to correct his exaggeration, or at least maybe he'll just be less of a dick. Really simple. It's not all made up. So I go on to say how Dan for me represents, the eco stereotypes of that time, where the Al Gore or Arnold Schwarzenegger or posing on the cover with Leo DiCaprio, like with the melting ice caps. And I like the idea of someone who isn't a raging prophet of doom, a stern-faced administrator, or an action hero, but a stubborn, joyful ex-Frisbee player of modest proportions, not that they're, a stubborn guy who fell in love with the place and fought like hell. I think it was fun to do this on the Charles. As I said, we kind of imagine a tame and preppy river when we think of the Charles. And I just want to read one thing, and this is a little bit, there's swearing, I apologize. This is about like kind of where I'd gotten to at this point. This was my 8th book, and I was really tired of language like, oh, great blue heron, help my soul, and keep all sweetness in light. Or, on the other hand, great blue heron, or Artie, I never ordered this. Remember, the order. It's like, I didn't want either of those languages. I wanted something different. And I'll just dive into this page. Lately, I've been invited to give a lot of talks. And when I speak, people sit listening, rapt, or at least putting on rapt faces. I suppose if I really wanted to make it big, I would start spreading the word of doom and intoning the phrase global warming over and over, hitting my audiences with it like a big stick. But I've got other ideas, impure and pesky little ideas that get in the way. For instance, sometimes I think that from an artistic point of view, the end of the world might be kind of interesting, or at least more interesting than all the dull predictions about it. Another troubling notion is that I'm not really sure I want to be this thing called an environmentalist. I'm not trying to be glib here. I don't think it's unimportant to fight for environmental causes. It's just that I'd like to put forth a sloppier form of environmentalism, a simultaneously more human and wild form, a more common sense form, and hopefully in the end, a more effective. Because the old, guilt-ridden, mystical enviro-speak just isn't cutting it, maybe the musty way of talking about nature needs to be thrown over a clothesline and beaten with a broom. That's what I've been trying to say in these talks I've been giving. My role, as I see it, is to try to pull the pole out of the collective environmental ass. It isn't easy work. Can I get these two? That's pretty good. It isn't easy work. For a costume, I wear a Hawaiian shirt. To get into character, I drink a few beers. Throughout my talks, I make jokes about how earnest everyone is, and the audience usually laughs along semi-masochistic. Sometimes I get carried away. I start feeling megalomaniacal and believe I am the bringer of a new language. I imagine myself to be Bob Dylan at Newport, playing electric guitar among the folkies, trying futilely to get them to yell out Judas. The last metaphor was confirmed by one of the door prizes I was given recently, a CD tribute to Rachel Carson's work after a talk at a conference in Boothbay Harbor, Maine, to celebrate Carson. On the way home, I listened to a song on the CD that told the story of the Osprey's near demise from DDT, and then its remarkable comeback, a subject I once wrote a book about. It's fair to say that Carson was one of my greatest heroes, but the music that came warbling out of my speaker seemed to be sung by a caricature of a late 50s beat singer wannabe who wailed about the poisons coursing through the Osprey's bodies with such excruciating earnestness that it almost made me root for the bird's death. Anything as long as the song ended. This, I found myself thinking, this is part of the problem. Why does nature turn us into this kind of warbler? It makes me long for a new sort of music, a music with energy, irreverence, and drive, a punk Osprey tribute sung by, say, the Sex Pistols. And maybe I think now that's a good place to start, with a new music. This was a big editing fight between me and my editor. I wanted to say a punk Osprey tribute sung by, say, the Butthole Surfers, and he made me put the Sex Pistols to the top of the voice. That's the kind of thing writers have to do. And I'm just going to read one sentence from here, and then I will stop the incessant reading. What I'm arguing against, I suppose, is an environmentalism that feels like the intellectual equivalent of a panic attack. Something where personally, when I feel panicked, I don't do much. I get overwhelmed. So I want to create some positive momentum and energy. And for me, at least as a writer and as a human doing things, a lot of that is about blasting stuff forward and getting it moving. And then when you're rolling, you become a different character than you were back when you were this paralyzed, freaked out character. And I find that in my everyday life, and I certainly see it in the environmental world. So one other thing I need to read, because I paraphrased it the other night, One of my favorite things Dan said during our trip was, we nature lovers are hypocrites, of course, he says. We are all hypocrites. None of us are consistent. The problem is we let that fact stop us. We worry that if we fight for nature, people will say, but you drive a car, or you fly a car, or you're a consumer too. And that stops us in our tracks. It's almost as if admitting that we are hypocrites. That we are hypocrites lets people off the hook. I pull my paddle out of the water to listen. What we need are more hypocrites, he says. We need hypocrites who aren't afraid of admitting it, but will still fight for the environment. We don't need some sort of pure movement run by pure people. We need hypocrites. I don't know if those were exact words. That sounds right. Yeah. I had the tape recorder going. But you know, you think about that. Anytime you do, like, think of like where I live. Unlike Cape Cod, I live on the beaches in North Carolina. Somebody throws a cigarette down, and I'm always, do I go over there and pick it up and say, and just even doing something as simple as that takes some courage. And it's hard because we come off as these moralists when we try to kind of fight the environmental fight. So how do we break through that, and how do we actually do things? So Dan and I set out down the river. Actually, I set out alone the first day in his kayaks, one of which I smashed against some rocks on the first day. But it was unbelievable in the very early stages. I felt at times like I was in the Amazon, or I was in this wild place, going through all the backyards and the marshes. And then we hooked up the next day. I don't know if it was on the second day we attempted to jump the sewer conduit pipe. We stopped at a sandbar, which was legal, right? Because the fancy houses were on either side, but we were legally settled in the middle. And then after, we had a couple beers for lunch. And then we paddled, and we saw this pipe across the Charles. And for some reason, I think it was both of our impulses to think in the canoe we were paddling, we were going to paddle faster and we were going to somehow jump. That's how they're both did. And I think I was probably in the front, right? And you were in the back. So we got up on top of it, and it started to seesaw, and then it started to kind of crack. So we made it through to the other side, and we used duct tape, the great fixer thing, but we were taking on water from that point on pretty seriously. And I think we went, and I'm going to defer to Dan's expertise, but we went down, we went across Cow Island Pond, and we had, I don't know if this was before, oh no, I know what we did. Cow Island Pond, we went down Long Ditch, and we set up a camp on DCR land, right? Yeah. And then we paddled, once we set up camp, we paddled our leaky canoe back into Roxbury to the Irish Ale House, right? And we tied up behind the house, and I think you had a gimlet, but we ate and drank like at steaks there, and then we paddled back home to this, well, you said it was the best place because Boston was more suspect. We actually watched the July 4th fireworks that night. So one weird thing happened during this, and this is the last thing I'll read, but I went to bed, we went to bed and got up, and in the morning, this big boot had appeared where we were. And I called it like a hooker boot, like a 70s reference, like it looked like, and I was just like, what the hell happened in the middle of the night? And there was also a scurrying, there was some little animal upstairs. So it was a tough night, but it led to me writing this little part, and then we will become more spontaneous. And this is the chapter called The Irish Ale House. This is my wildness, a trashy ditch with a hooker boot for Florida. Maybe that's a good thing. Sometimes I don't think people value wildness because they believe they have to hike to the top of a mountain in Alaska to find it. I've traveled all over the world to experience the wild, but some of my wildest moments have been closer to home. On Cape Cod, on the same domestic beach I've returned to all my life, where the summer is all kids, umbrellas, and beach balls, The winter cold clears into people, and its character changes. From the rocks at the end of the beach, I once watched hundreds of snow-white gannets dive from 100 feet in the air, plunging into the freezing winter with ocean like living javelins. Then as the birds dove down, something else dove up. A breaching humpback whale, rising as it herded the same fish the gannets were diving. In wildness is the preservation of the world, wrote Thoreau, but as many others have pointed out, people often get the quote wrong and use wilderness instead. While wilderness might be untrammeled land along the Alaskan coast, wildness can happen anywhere. Wildness is unplanned, unpredictable. You can't put a fence around it. It can happen in the jungle or on a city river. It rises up when you least expect it. It's of vital importance that we not define this wildness as wilderness, that we not construct intellectual walls between the natural and the human. In fact, it's while observing my own species, my own family, that I experienced the two wildest moments of my life. The first came while holding my father's hand while he died. I listened to his final breaths, first deep and then gasping and fish-like, and I gripped his hand tight enough to feel the last pulsings of his heart. Something rose in me that day, something deep, animal, unexpected, something that I didn't experience again until my daughter Hadley was born 9 years later. Before her birth, everyone warned me that my life was about to change, the implication being that it would become tamer. But there was nothing tame about those 24 hours in the hospital or that indelible moment after the C-section when the doctor reached into my wife up to his elbows and a bloody head emerged straight up, followed by Hadley's full emergence and a wild squall of life as her little arms rose over her head in victory. Sure, the surge was physiological, goosebumps and tingling scalp and 100 other physical symptoms, but it was more than that too, a wild rush, both the loss of and a return to self. These moments of death and life, as much as any moments of pristine nature, reconnect us to our primal selves, remind us that there is something wild lurking below the everyday, and that having tasted wildness, we return to our ordinary lives, both changed and charged. So while I'll continue to seek out and protect wild places, I do so knowing that I don't need to travel to the Amazon or Everest to experience the ineffable. It's on that same Cape Cod beach where I first walked holding my mother's hand, near the waters where I later spread my father's ashes, that I learned that my wildest moments are often closest to home. And it's there that I now bring Hadley each summer, secretly hoping that the wild will rise up in her when she least expects it. So, to me, that was part of the book. A limited wildness, a non-segregation of the natural and the wild, a more openly hypocritical wildness. We don't have to be pure to be in the wild. A less shamanistic, oh, great heron wildness. A less doom of the world sort of wildness. A funnier wildness. A more commonsensical and a more effective wildness. And I couldn't have had a better character, human being actually, though as a writer I think I'm just a character, to exemplify that than Dan, who throughout the trip was a lot of fun, but was a font of knowledge and taught me about the places, and who himself had been inspired to protect the Charles, in part from his own direct contact and experience. So I loved having that, the journey itself was a blast, but metaphorically it really worked for me as a writer. So despite my mistruths, you were very helpful to me. So thanks for that. I don't know, we don't have a planned transition, but you want to talk about what really happened rather than the...
Well, first off, thank you all for coming out to listen to David and I. It's certainly been a long journey for me on the river. I think what I'd like to do is first give a little historic context to the Charles River and to some degree dispel some of the myth that there were certainly other heroes that set up the opportunity for all of us to collectively come out and to both heal the river and to restore the river. And a lot of it really started in 1893 with Charles Elliott, who was actually the first landscape architect of the Metropolitan Park Commission. which was the forerunner of the Metropolitan District Commission, which was the forerunner of the Department of Conservation and Recreation, which is where I'm hoping I'll finish my career. And Charles Elliott was really an incredible guy. He, in 1 year, he walked all of the stream banks, the rock hills, and the open spaces of the metropolitan region and prepared these hand-drawn plans of what he felt should be protected. It was really one of the first efforts in the country to think regionally in terms of open space, in terms of water resources, and to transcend local political boundaries in establishing really important places. And that led to the preservation. His plan led to the protection of the Blue Hills, the Middlesex Fells, Stony Brook, Beaver Brook, which was the first public open space in the state, in the country, Revere Beach, which was the first public beach in the country, and the rivers of the metropolitan region. Elliott identified all kinds of land along the Charles River, the Mystic River, and the Neponset River, and between 1896 and 1910, the Metropolitan Park Commission went out and acquired hundreds of acres. And on just the Charles, between Watertown Square and Hemlock Gorge in Newton and Needham, they protected 600 acres. So that acreage, after it got protected, the Charles, in terms of its recreational use, really entered its heyday. And pre-World War II, from 1910 to World War II, there was a trolley car that went right up Commonwealth Avenue, and all the citizenry of Boston would come out on the trolleys and go to this incredible park where the Newton Marriott now sits, called Norumbega Park, where there was amusement halls and zoos, and over 3,000 canoe liveries. At one time, in the Lakes District by the Marriott, they tried to have a floating movie theater, but everybody was getting nauseous in their canoes. So it only made it one season. There's still a jail cell in the canoe rental building there from when people would be cited for courting in their canoes, which was kind of an interesting thing. There's some great old postcards of the women with the parasols and the guys paddling them around, usually wearing a sport coat. There was also, there was a lot of dance, there was dance halls. The Totem Pole Lodge was a really large and popular dance hall where people like Glenn Miller and Count Basie and all sorts of folks played. There was another dance hall that's a little lesser known, where the footings of the dance hall are still present by Prospect Street in Waltham, and that was the Nuttings on the Charles. And again, some really prominent swing bands played there. Both of those dance halls did not allow alcohol, so you would often see flasks, I guess, in people's coats as they went in there. But the point of that was that after this sort of heyday of use, World War II came along, industrialization, suburbanization, and people, society, towns, all of us, the citizenry, turned their backs on the river, and there was the combination of the explosion of industrialization, which was pouring all kinds of pollution into the river, as well as suburbanization, where people were more interested in cultivating their own backyard than going into those public common spaces that had become so popular in the early 1900s. So what happened was a sad story many of you are familiar with. The river went into a state of disrepair. The water was polluted. In turning our backs on the river, what happens? Well, industrialization blew up along the river, and slowly the land that was protected by Elliott earlier on gets encroached upon. And those encroachments started around 1950 and continued all the way to 1990. Fortunately, due to great work, the first Earth Day of 1970, a lot of the legislation that Richard Nixon passed, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, MEPA, and the National Environmental Policy Act, and the Endangered Species Act, all signed by Richard Nixon. Following that, the Charles, people were still pretty much ignoring the land and what had happened to it, which was devastating, and were really focused on the water. The water of the Charles was highly polluted. It was considered unsafe for contact recreation of any kind. And from 1960 through 1980, $250 million was spent in the metropolitan region around the Charles, separating out these massive truncated sewer lines that were hammering the river with raw sewage. That really was the thing that set up the possibilities of some of the works that I was able to spearhead and lead later on, because with the river being an open sewer, there was really no value to the land for recreation. So those major cleanup efforts, which continue to this day, we're still finding illegal connections on the river, and a lot of the great work of groups like this continue to make it better and better. But when I came along, I started working at the MDC in 1986 as the Harbor Islands planner. And after about 4 years of working on some restoration work with the forts of the Harbor Islands, the former chief planner, Julia O'Brien, said to me, "Why don't you take a look at the Upper Charles, Dad?" I said, "Great, I grew up in Newton, this is perfect." So I came out on the river, and basically I fought really hard in 1991 for $20,000 in survey money. And we conducted a survey from Watertown Square at Galen Street all the way to Commonwealth Ave, where the Newton Marriott is. That's a 6-mile section of river. And we identified 92 illegal encroachments along the river. There were 100-car parking lots, industrial yards, residential pigeon coops. You, from Watertown Square to that point, you could not really get along the river. It was that bad. And I went back there literally on my hands and knees sometimes, crawling around, taking photos, filming with an old camcorder, documenting the property line. And what's striking to me, and this is a little bit contrary to David's anti-shaman statement, was that as I crawled back there through the muck and mire and there was an old landfill in Watertown and all these broken bottles and debris, I was just stunned by the presence of wildlife still. And I'd be standing there and thinking, wow, it's the great blue heron would land, or night herons and various forms of bird life, and you see the fish in the river, and I just thought, wow, this could be really incredible. I mean, despite what the damage we had done, I had the vision, and that was the key piece of it as far as my contribution. I had the vision looking at that, and I could see it transformed in a way that not many other people could. And engaged in what turned into, to this day, literally, it's still going on, a 30-year effort to restore the banks of the Charles River from Watertown all the way up through Newton, Weston, and all the way into Wellesley and Needham. What happened was I worked really hard at coming up with a program to take back those illegal encroachments. And it was funny because the first time I identified them, the Globe ran a big piece and it was in the People's section. It said, "Hopes rise on the Upper Charles." And the first reaction of all the elected officials and the people I work with was, we got to penalize these people that are encroaching. And I had the wherewithal to say, no, wait a minute, we're all guilty here, folks. We all turned our backs on the rivers. They just happened to be the abutters that took advantage of that, and probably it was former owners that originally encroached. So I wanted to really come up with a program that didn't ostracize those people, but actually connected them back to the river as well, helped them understand that a restored river corridor would improve their property values, and really try to turn them into stewards rather than, just bitter encroachers who were being penalized. So I worked for about 3 years, forming all kinds of relationships with those folks, and after those 3 years, there was a guy at the Attorney General's office, Jim Milkey, who was head of the Environment section, and he had said he'll kind of be the hammer if I need him, but to go out on my own and see what I can negotiate. And I resolved every one of those encroachments in writing, signed off, some of them paid fines where they had really damaged the land. We collected about $150,000 and put it in a trust fund earmarked back to the river. And I went in with these cases like this high, and I put them on Jim's desk and said, here it is, they're all resolved. And he just looked at me and said, well, that's the most encroachments that have ever been resolved in Commonwealth history in one place. And I looked right at you and I said, well, that's a good amount of work. So that is a piece of it I'm proud of. And after that, we began the design work. Carroll Johnson was a great design firm, began the master planning work, and I was really committed to get something built, so we had construction drawings as a critical first phase of that design work. And right at the right time, this new program came along through the feds called ICE-T. It was the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act. I saw that it was a transportation program, and I really saw it as an opportunity, as a way to restore the river corridor. And I've been quoted in the Globe as saying that I really kind of tricked the feds that we were building this transportation corridor for bikes, but really what I wanted to do was restore the ecological health of the river corridor and connect people back to it. So we were, over the next decade or so, was able to secure about $10 million in grants. I wrote all those grants and was able to get all of that money and put it into the river. And I would estimate that because they were all parking lots and encroachments, it was quite a challenge because it was almost like a naked palette of land of what do we do? Because once you ripped up the pavement, from river to the abutter's property line was nothing. And we, in some sections, I think we averaged out per mile, putting in about $250,000 worth of native plantings with transportation money, which is really great. And you know, Russ Cohen's here, who many of you know, he's just a great wild edibles guru for this region, and has also written books on it. And Russ was a great consultant for me to get a bunch of edible stuff in there as well, along there. So we were doing beach plum and blueberries and stuff that would benefit songbirds. And it ended up, at the end of it, as many of you have seen the corridor now, a guy, Richard Premack, came out, and I was really happy about this, but he had 2 students do their master's thesis dissertation on the restoration of that corridor. And to his mind, he said, I believe this is one of the only places in the metropolitan region where a native ecosystem has been truly restored. And one of the theses that the students did was they were actually monitoring the rate of growth of the native plantings that we put there compared to a place that was wild in how the native plantings were growing. And they were all actually excelling along this river more than in the other place. So it was really interesting. And I think a neat point of that is, and one of the things that gives me inspiration, the other night, David was asked by a woman in the crowd, so is it really just doom though? I mean, environmentally, are we screwed? And he had a pretty good answer too, but I thought about the...
Which was yes.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to be overwhelmed about. But I think about those projects and I said, you know, one of the pieces of really good news that I've learned in this kind of work is that the nature is really forgiving. I mean, when I think about how badly we hammered that river, and that's just really an example of every river in just about every urban area of America. We hammered the Ponset and the Mystic as bad or worse, and they're coming back. But the forgiveness of nature, its resilience, and that really, I was sort of just a starter. I was like starter seed, and then nature found its way, and animals came back, and the bird life has come back, and it's one of the best fish runs in the state now with the anadromous fish run of the owl life and the shad. So that was really exciting stuff. I think I also want to tell you a little bit about what's happened since I last spoke with the WLT and Land Trust, and what's currently happening, some of the good news that continues along the river. One piece that people may have not seen yet is up in Wellesley at Route 16. There's a section of railroad corridor that goes from Riverside Station out to Route 16, and the DCR owns that. And we've built the first section of it in Newton, from Newton to Wellesley, and we restored a bridge over the river. It's a really neat project that came out really nice, and it's another. The old Grossman's that used to sit there is now housing, and you have to be 55 to live there, and it's high-end housing. A 1-bedroom apartment is going for $5,000 a month. They got a little putting green out back and a fire pit and all this on the river. But the guy, Ted Ty from National Development, who built that, worked with me and actually gave us an easement. I continued the path where you can now go over that bridge and go up into Wellesley. And it's a really neat piece of the river that if you haven't seen, it's worth going up and looking at. In that same area, there used to be 3 historic footbridges that were all part of the Norm Vega Park that I mentioned earlier. It was actually Riverside Park. which was a sort of a sister park to Norumbega. And those 3 footbridges have been closed for about 25 years. And just 2 years ago, we finished the full restoration of 2 of them. One is the Pony Trust Bridge near Riverside Tea Station. We restored that whole park and the parking lot. And we did the other footbridge as well. There's one left near the South Boathouse. And when that one's done, there'll be this really neat loops that you can do back and forth over these historic bridges. So that's another piece that we've been able to accomplish over the last few years. The most recent pieces, one is right here in Waltham. Maybe some of you have seen it. The new underpass that goes under the Elm Street Bridge. That's an interesting one in terms of how it came about. I've been the driving force to try to bring it about for the last 15 years. And that one was really hard to get funding for. People didn't quite understand why we needed it. I was really clear why we needed it, and but I couldn't get the construction funding together, and it kind of got backburnered. And just about 2.5 years ago, DOT called me. Now, Blue Heron Bridge, have many of you seen Blue Heron Bridge? Blue Heron Bridge, when we built that just about a decade ago, it was built with federal grant money. And when the DCR was first being formed, it was the same time. Now, I think what happened was some of the finance people at DCR were overwhelmed by these reimbursement forms and got lazy and just paid for the Blue Heron Bridge with state money. So now, 8 years later, DOT's calling me saying, geez, Dan, the feds are about to de-obligate that grant money. And without flinching, I said, we need that for the final phase. That's how, that's being filmed. So that's how that underpass, well, $850,000 of it is a $1.2 million project. But if you're around this spring, we'll be doing an event out there and a ribbon cutting. It's a really awesome connection, and anyone who's used it, it's just to stand and look at the chimney of the museum. It's a really great piece of work that people have done out there. And it's a team effort, all this stuff. The other piece of good news is that across the river, the reason we never thought we could go on that side was the old Longview Fiber site, which has a lot of pollution. They used to, anyone doesn't know, at one time they made most of the paper bags in America, and a lot of glues and other things that this is a handy spot to dump it, right? So, and the DCI didn't really own enough land over there to do a pathway, but now that land, the Longview Fiber land and the former Vinnie Mueller Park and Mulch site has been purchased by a developer, and they're going to be putting a large 210 plus residential unit development on that huge piece of land there. And they're actually started it. They're out there right now cleaning it up and doing remediation. As part of their project, they have agreed to build a pathway from Elm Street all the way to the movie theater. So that's going to be another really critical link, so that if you don't want to use the underpass, you'll now have 2 alternatives to connect to downtown Waltham. So that's pretty exciting. The other missing piece from the last time I was speaking with all of you was Prospect Street past the Watch Factory. And I worked really long and hard with Eric and they did a big development out there in the Watch Factory, which has come out incredible. But they finally were convinced to gift to the DCR an easement behind the Watch Factory. So when you go out there now, there's a blue line painted. From the blue line to the river is the public pathway that leads all the way to the Lord Ave boat launch. So that's another key missing piece that's been filled in. Another project I'll mention on the Charles that's really exciting is in Watertown on Charles River Road. That's going to open this spring as well, where we're building a braille trail. That one was a real passionate endeavor for me, and it all has been in some ways. But that one, about 15 years ago, I met with Stephen Rothstein, who was the president of Perkins School for the Blind, and I said, geez, Stephen, this is the largest school for the blind in the country. You abut the river, and the kids can't get to it. We got to change this. And I kept plugging away, and finally we were able to pull together some partnership money about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, and get some design going. Sasaki, to their credit, who's in Watertown, did a little bit of pro bono work on the design, and we've now designed what a woman who works at Perkins, who is blind, who's been helping me with the Braille, feels it's going to be amongst the cutting-edge Braille trails in the country. If you haven't gone down there and seen any of it, there's an artist, Mitch Ryerson, who's done these incredible handmade canoes that the kids can sit in. It mimics walking in a dry riverbed, and there's a marimba bench they can play, and all kinds of neat stuff. So that's, and as part of it, we've restored all the pathways along the river as well. So that's another missing link. Another big thing that's coming is the Greeno Boulevard restoration. Greeno Boulevard was the longest section of river corridor left that really you could not navigate on foot or by bike. It was really dangerous. And we were able, working with some partners again, Herb Nolan from the Solomon Fund put some design money up, and we were able to push it forward. And right now we're doing a $1.5 million complete transformation of Greeno Boulevard, where we're taking out a lane of traffic, widening the parkland, putting in a multi-use path, and this spring it'll be fully landscaped. We're hoping to finish that by July. Before I open it up for dialogue, I guess another piece I wanted to say is the Charles, for me, had become a catalyst to just much more work across the state. Once we became the DCR, we became a statewide agency. I'm now the Director of Recreation Facilities Planning and Design, basically for the state. So we go all the way out to the Asher-Wiltercook and Mount Greylock. And you know, when I started that whole Charles thing, for me it was a greenway. It's certainly a bikeway. It's a bit of a nature preserve. But the term that always struck me as being most accurate to me in describing what I thought I was trying to do was it's really a corridor of life. It's a corridor, it's a living system of life, of people integrating with nature, relating to nature, going out and getting rested for themselves. It's free to go to, which is what's really great about it. Anyone can go there. There's no economic barriers. There's no ethnic barriers. People mix really well in these spaces. And we now have taken that vision from the Charles and have applied it to the Mystic, the Neponset, the Blackstone, the Saugus River. We're currently building on the Neponset a $20 million greenway that you all know the Blue Heron Bridge. Well, when people were coming and saying, who should we go to for a bridge design? I said, you know, I don't think you're going to do better than the Blue Heron Bridge. So we took the Blue Heron Bridge design and we're building the exact same bridge on the Neponset right now, only it's 35 feet longer where it's going to cross. And they're actually going to put that bridge in probably in late April. If anyone's around, it's going to be quite a sight because it's going to take 2 cranes to pick it up and drop it in place. I'll certainly be out there. So we're doing that project, and when the next phase of the Neponset project is going to connect all along 93 in front of the gas tanks. We're actually designing a boardwalk that will connect all the Neponset work all the way back to Boston and Castle Island, which is just an amazing connection. When you think about it, you could go from Quincy, Milton, Mattapan Square into the city off-road on a bike or foot is I think a really, it's a transportation network, but it's also a nature trail, an urban nature trail that, to David's point, you can connect with all kinds of wildness while 93 is zipping by 40 feet away. And the Mystic also, I mean, I've been turning a lot of my energy lately, in addition to all these other things, on the Mystic River, which I think is one of the forgotten gems in the system. And in the last 4 years, we've built a system that was called the Alewife Greenway, which now connects the Minuteman Bike Trail all the way to the Mystic River on both sides of the Alewife Brook. It was a $4 million federal stimulus project. I think it's one of the only parks built with federal stimulus money in the state, which I was proud of. And the Mystic River, we've now begun to restore all the pathways along the Mystic. There's been a transformation at Assembly Square. And we're designing phase 2 of the Watertown Cambridge Greenway, which I'm also managing. We've built phase 1 right behind the Arsenal Mall. When that next phase is built, which goes from Arlington Street in Watertown to Fresh Pond Parkway, and then we connect it back down to Little Greeno Boulevard, we will have basically connected the Charles River Reservation to the Mystic River Reservation, back to Boston, back to the Museum of Science, all off-road. And we're 2 links away from it. So I guess we're up to a lot. You know, it's a lot of work. I want us to say that groups like this have been a constant source of support and inspiration for my efforts and the DCR's efforts. You know, these projects, as many of you may remember in the early days, they're not easy. There was a lot of opposition initially. The good news is now that now people have seen how great these projects really are. It's hard to come out and say it's going to be all crime anymore, because it just isn't. Anywhere we build these, they're nothing but families and community and people. Yeah, there's a little graffiti and some litter, but overall it's 99% an absolute enhancement for the citizenry of the Commonwealth. And the last piece I'll mention that has been really interesting to watch, when I looked at that 1991 Hope's Rise to the Charles River article, I went through it and I saw a couple of quotes that I had made, and I said, not only can we restore the river, but if we restore the river, think about the land use transformation that will happen next to the river in all these industrial yards. And sure enough, in the last 10 years, there's been, well, you see the one in Waltham, a Stop and Shop, you know, 200 units, love it or not, it is a form of smart growth. The old Harts Mason is now 120 units, all filled, people paying $3,000 a month to live there. And there's another one on Pleasant Street in Watertown where this guy came to me, the developer, and he said, yeah, Dan, I know you really didn't like the last couple of developments, so what do you think about if they bought this commercial site? And I said, why doesn't somebody do something high-end and honor the river and not think of it as something where you have to use this hardy plank junk and make it look like an industry building? So he did. He built 5 townhouses on Pleasant Street and sold all of them in 2 weeks for $1 million each. And I said, so there you have it, you know. And he said, we just follow you guys around and wait for you to build a park. And then come in and get rich. But with that, I think David and I will just open it up for questions and dialogue, because I'm really interested to hear from some of you as well. If I can see your hand.
You've got to hear from me first.
Yep.
I'm flying to Tucson tomorrow morning, and one of the people there is going to be Dave Foreman, who started Earth First. And what he's doing struck me as you were talking about. Connectivity is one of those big words, and rewilding is another. And his dream is of linking the big parks in the West for a migratory pathway. Because unless you have things connected, islands are where things go down, basically. And so what you're doing in a lot of ways is connecting those different places and creating those corridors. On our smaller, we're both Massachusetts boys who've been out west and been inspired by what we've seen there. But to bring it back here and make it real here is exciting too. So it's a cool thing that's happening environmentally. Is the whole idea of connecting, not just parks that can quickly become museums and cut off, but connecting to other wild places.
Question? Yeah.
Okay, so I have 2 questions on
Sure.
pollution, which is, I want to try to jump on the subject. So you mentioned about the water being kind of in way better shape, and the animal life is fantastic. I heard about the EPA being sued by the Environmental Law Foundation or something about runoff into the Charles not being mitigated from a lot of golf courses and such. I wonder if you could comment on that. And the second thing is, are the sediments in the Charles, probably also in the other rivers you mentioned, are they so toxic that we would never touch them to try and change over that layer of earth?
Yeah, to your first question, the EPA was not being sued. It was us. We would be sued, and the EPA was involved in the suit. They're really the enforcement agency that the DCR was being held accountable for the continued pollutants that were coming in the river, even though obviously a lot of that was not on us, but we had to take the responsibility. And guy I work with, Rob Lowell, has really for the last 10 years done incredible work on stormwater improvements up and down the river with new head walls and catch basins and functioning separators to make some real headway on that front. But so that's what's been happening on that. As far as the sediment is not good. There's certainly, the colloidal particles that get held in that sediment. There's heavy metals. There are things in the sediment that you would not want to wade in. It's one of the things that we continue to bring up when there's advocacy for wanting to bring back swimming in the river. The water column itself is Class B water most days, so that it's definitely suitable for contact recreation. If you fall out of a kayak or canoe, you're probably fine. If you waded in those sediments, that you wouldn't want to do it very long. The Mystic is worse than the Charles. I'll tell you a little anecdote. They, as everyone knows, rowing is a really big activity on the Charles, right? And, well, they wanted to use the Charles, and they wanted it to qualify for Olympic time trials. So they actually but to do that, you have to have an electric clock, and you have to have the right system set up in the river. So we permitted it, and this goes back 5-6 years ago, and they put in the race course, which were these buoys that had vertical steel cables down to a cable that ran the whole length of the course in the sediment. And the cable in the sediment was about 3-inch steel cable that was designed against corrosion or salt or whatever, and it had like a 50-year warranty on it. It corroded and snapped in 1 year. I'm not quite sure what did that, but they didn't put it back. So yeah, we have ongoing challenges with what we've done out there. As I said, the water column itself, even after a heavy rain, it's still draining an urban watershed. Urban watersheds have a lot of byproduct that comes in the first flush. So I recommend to people that after big rainstorms, you may not want to, wade around in there or touch the water for at least a day. In dry periods, it's actually really clean.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As a geologist, could I do a follow-up on your studies? It's not worth the hundreds of millions of dollars it would take to dredge them.
Yeah.
When you try to dredge them, you bring up more problems than you would have just leaving them there. We found this out in Housatonic and Hudson when EPA went up against General Electric, and it was just a disaster.
Yeah.
So my analog is asbestos paint in buildings. We spent billions of dollars trying to remove that stuff. We just should have left it there.
Thanks. That being said, anyone in the last 2 months who's driven on Soldiers Field Road by Artesani Park, that's the biggest parking lot on the Charles. Maybe you've seen these big, large, odd-looking structures out there. Well, that's a dredging operation. We're actually been. What happened was that a lot of the Mass Pike sediment actually comes into the Charles. So in a winter like last winter, you can imagine the amount of sand that's been tossed on those roads. It's in the urban watershed. There's a pipe that comes out of the Charles. The sand had built up so much down by the Watertown and Newton Yacht Clubs that they couldn't get boats out anymore. And there was literally sandbars that you could see. So we finally did go in there in the last 2 months and did a pretty major dredging operation. And the spoils were brought a mile all the way up the river to Artesani, where they're settling and being taken away for proper disposal. So we will do it in emergency situations, but your point is totally on as far as whether it's worth it or not. In this case, I think it was. Yes?
I'm Barbara Passero from Meadowscape before Biodiversity, and we take land, wasteland and a lawn, and turn it into a meadow, land that's available for native plants and native species. And all I see is in Waltham, I really wish people would be environmental advocates, because all I see in Waltham is development of every single spot. And I think that's because the EPA is coming down against people building along the river. I read that recently. And the place you're talking about on the on the other side of the river where they're going to make a walk. They already took all the trees down that were all on that river, that were protecting the river from the pollution from that development. They keep using every bit of land for development. That means that land is not available for wildlife, and our whole biodiversity system is broken. We're very close to losing all our bees and all our food. So I want people here to be active environmentally. I know this WLT Manifesto is not environmental activist fruit, but you need to be active and get your selectmen, your city councilors, your representatives. They have to know that this is close, that the world is crashing in front of them. And I was at a conference yesterday for education for children, and they said you cannot bring this to children because they get so depressed. They can't stand it. But what about their parents? How come the kids get depressed, but the parents go on? You people with children, what can we do for the future if you don't get your advocates, if you don't advocate for the future? You're going to have a river with nothing in it. The river is so dry now. There's nothing in that river. The birds are walking on the rocks. We have that river, the thing that goes underneath the river is underwater. I mean, I'm an advocate. I know, I try these things. We have to be together. I watched the WLT and Manifesto become an environmental advocacy group and become active in protecting Waltham. Because Waltham, I live here, and it's just a mess. And I have this program because I need to feel positive, and I would expand it to any place we need, but we can't go in every single corner and expect to have the biodiversity we need to survive in the future. So
thank you. Yeah, I appreciate those comments. One piece of good news, on that section on the other side of the boardwalk where you said they took all the trees down, I actually ordered the removal of those trees, but the reason was that it was mostly sumac and invasive trees. There wasn't really anything native. It was all volunteer growth, and we needed to clear one area to get in to remove the old railroad bridge. We had to set up a crane to take that railroad bridge out, which was really a blight. And the good news is that all of that is going to get restored with native plantings as part of the redevelopment there. There's some great points, though. I agree we need advocacy and we need to protect biodiversity. Absolutely, Maria?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out another project that Dan was involved with, and that was the establishment of the Beaverbrook North Reservation here in Waltham, which is like 290 acres of land from the old Metropolitan State Hospital. And at the same time, the city of Waltham acquired the Gaylor unit, which is another 55 acres of land. And that is also being preserved as conservation land. And every day that I go out there, I see dozens and dozens of people enjoying that park and not aware what it took us, the 10 years of fighting to get that, and the political machinations that we had to go through to get that park because of the Romney administration opposition. So I'd like to thank you for your part in it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And that was a great project. There's a funny story. John Travolta filmed a civil action on site at that park, and when they were filming it, I had to go out and meet with the producers and stuff because we had just turned it into a park, but hadn't really cleaned anything up yet. In fact, we hadn't even knocked down the buildings that were going to get knocked down, because a bunch of the old hospital buildings were going to come down. And I met out there with them, and they said, well, we want to blow up a wetland, because they have a scene in the movie where the scene, that's how they caught W.R. Grace, right? Because these kids were playing with firecrackers. They threw a firecracker in a swamp, and that's how that whole thing unfolded. So they had to get that scene. So I said, well, I actually know this one wetland that's completely trashed. It's all invasives. You could blow that one up and then restore it as a real wetland. And then they wanted to cover the whole power station with creosote for effect. And I said, no, it's a bad idea. It's going to be leaching down into the groundwater. Then they wanted to destroy this historic stone wall because it was in the way of some shot scene they wanted to shoot. The long and short of it was that I had this mitigation package worked out with them. I said, no creosote, we're going to restore the wetland. I don't know, it was probably going to cost them maybe $500,000 or $750,000. John Travolta was getting paid $20 million for the movie. I got a call from the governor's office. I got banned from the site. They put the creosote on there. It all leached into the soil. They blew up the wetland and didn't restore it. And I thought, this is a movie about environmental injustice. So anyway, thanks for that. Thanks for that. It's a great property. It's worth going out and seeing it. In fact, we've actually added another 100 acres in Lot 1 of the Middlesex County Hospital on the other side of Walnut Street. That's now DCR parkland as well. Yeah, is there a hand up there?
Three-part question. Number one, is there a Friends of the Charles River Parkway organization? If not, do you mind one being formed? And the third part is, can I go out to the river someday with my clippers and do some clipping and get all the dead vines and things that are really tearing trees down? Would I get arrested?
No, you won't. Sure, have at it as far as that goes. The Friends group, there's not really a large, Friends groups are fairly segmented along the river. Now keep in mind, this river starts at Echo Lake in Hopkinton, same place as the Marathon. Marathon's 26 miles, the river's 81 miles. So this is quite a winding river as it makes its way into the Boston Harbor. So there's segments, and for example, in the Charles Basin, there's a citizen advisory committee and a quasi-Friends group who get involved in various issues there. There's the Esplanade Association that are focused very much on the Esplanade area and trying to take care of that and make sure it's stewarded properly. There was a small Friends group up in Auburndale for a while. I'm not sure how active they are anymore. There was the Friends of Hemlock Gorge, which is, I think, a small but still breathing group. So there are small groups, and to your question, do we welcome more? Yes, absolutely. So if somebody wants to form any size, type, form of Friends group that can help us steward this river, we welcome it, open arms. Thank you.
The Waltham Land Trust, we have a stewardship program. I don't know if you live in Waltham. If you don't, I can talk with you later. If you do, okay, great. Yeah, so the Waltham Land Trust, they have a stewardship program, and we train folks how to identify and remove invasive plants and pick up trash and this and that. And folks will have an online form that goes to one of Dan's colleagues who helps us address bigger issues. So I definitely love to speak with you about getting you involved.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Hi, I wonder if you can comment on the way that freshwater species and abundance has changed as the cleanup of the Charles River has progressed as a general indicator of the health of the river.
Yeah, the freshwater species are doing good. I mean, for a while, what was happening was there's two fish runs in the Charles River. One is an anadromous fish run where they leave the river, go to the ocean and spawn and come back. The other is a catadromous fish run, much lesser known. There's only one species that does that. That's the American eel that comes from the ocean and breeds and leaves. So it's a reversal. I'm sorry, lives in the river, goes to the ocean and comes back. The alewife come from the ocean, up the river, and leave. Those are both doing really well. There's been now a 7-year ban on the removal of anadromous fish from the Charles. And what was happening when they were crashing for a while, I figured this out with this guy from Fisheries and Wildlife, who was really great. And we went out and said, what is happening? I said, what was happening was down at Watertown Dam, despite all these fish ladders that go all the way up into Wellesley, a huge percentage of the fish are spawning right there below that dam on the rocky areas along there. Now, they lay their eggs on rocks, and the male sprays the eggs, so that the eggs are literally attached to the rocks. The fishermen were all wading all over the place, catching the alewife in nets, and they're crushing the eggs. So they banned both wade, you can't do that anymore. You can't wade fish, and you can't fish for alewife at all anymore. And a lot of it was You know, I felt bad because a lot of it was ethnic communities or Cambodian and Laotians that they would get the food source out of there. And you could take at one point up to a 5-gallon bucket. But currently, that ban has been effective, and I've noted that the fish run is definitely doing well. There's bass. A guy caught, the river was stocked with northern pike. People don't realize we did that, but it was probably about 20 years ago. And Maple Cove in Waltham, there's a bunch of coves that go around the Lakes District. We started an ice fishing program out there a number of years ago, and not this winter, but in your typical winter, maybe I don't know if it's typical anymore actually, but in past winters, guys would ice fish in these coves, and a guy pulled out a 48-inch, 37-pound northern pike through the ice in Waltham in the Charles River. So there's some really dynamic life. I'll tell you a quick funny story on the catadromous species, the American eel. About 10 years ago, a guy came and he wanted to trap the eel for consumption by people. And I went to the commissioner, this thing came to my desk, and I said, that's a really bad idea. This eel lives in the sediment of the Charles River Basin. I don't think you should be catching it and feeding it to people, right? And so it ended up, it was a friend of his, he goes, I want this thing approved. I said, so I get the proposal back, I'm like, oh, what am I going to do with this thing? And I was reading it, and right at the end of it, it's this long proposal, he goes, 100% of the catch will be exported to Paris, France. Screw the French. So he's out there, setting his traps, and catching the eel, and fortunately, it did not have any economic viability, and he only lasted about 3 years, and it just went away of its own failure. So
It kills a few hundred.
You know, I think it was the year they won the World Cup, though. So. Anyway.
This is a question about Memorial Drive, and you can make a little folklore or not. I heard that Memorial Drive was kind of not meant to stay there, and that with as far as restoration of access to the rivers, is there any truth that it breaks apart the walkway from the city into the river? And it was it was there put there as a temporary thing, and or is it Storrow Drive?
Storrow Drive, a gift of the wife of James Storrow, who was a real advocate of the place. In their gift from the Storrows, there was a restriction on that gift of that entire corridor that it could never be anything but horse and buggies, no cars. That obviously didn't hold up, right? So that's why when you're thinking a little bit, there's a couple of things happening right now. On the Cambridge side, on Memorial Drive, where the pathways are just really dangerous and inefficient or inadequate. We are currently spending $4 million in what's called Memorial Drive Phase 2, and we're restoring basically from the BU Bridge all the way back to the Longfellow. That's all going to get restored, 10-foot pathways, new landscaping, new drainage. When you get to like River Street, from River Street to the Elliott Bridge, that section is really challenging. There has been talk of widening it into Memorial Drive and shifting the road in that section, and that may be something else that you've heard of. There's another big project happening there, the Mass Pike off-ramp with DOT, where people are talking about moving all of Storrow Drive over and widening the entire parkland and making new bridges into Brighton and Alston. That's a real big vision piece that is not going to happen maybe in any of our lives, but it's on the table. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
I have a related question. In Memorial Drive in front of MIT in Cambridge, you have the two roadways and this large grassy area in between them, which is a sort of a no man's land. Has there ever been any thought of moving the roadway that's close to the river up against the other one, so then you have an esplanade on that side of the river too?
Yeah, people looked at it. It's multi-millions of dollars to engage in something like that. I mean, from my From my perspective right now on the Charles, that would be a novelty project, whereas right now, River Street Bridge is a mess, Arsenal Street Bridge is a mess, North Beacon Street Bridge is a mess. There are, every bridge beyond the Anderson and the Longfellow, which they're currently restoring, needs full restoration and accommodation for bikes and peds, which they're going to do on the Anderson and the Longfellow. And I mean, none of that money is appropriated right now. So if we can get through all the infrastructure that's currently broken, I think some of the visionary ideas like that you've mentioned, which is a good one, maybe moving Sturrow Drive someday, I think those are really, to me, to my mind, those are sort of secondary to just fixing everything that's broken that's out there.
I have a quick question. Do you know when the run for all the, I guess it's herring, or it looks like herring, in Watertown Square is?
The herring, the blueback herring, and there's some shad, owlite and shad.
It's like around this time of year, I think, isn't it?
Maybe this year.
I don't know. But
Typically, it's early to mid-May, and the best way is just watch for the birds. When you start seeing some fairly crazy gull activity, the night herring, which come from the islands where they have their rookeries and breed, when the night herring start to come in, black-crowned night herring, and you see them starting to roost, they're waiting to feed on those fish heavily. So watch for the night heron and the gulls, and maybe some of the ethnic population that still take the fish.
It is great to see them. The water is so thick with the fish.
Yeah, it's awesome. An interesting little anecdote. Starting about 3 years ago, people realized that striped bass, which have a really tough tolerance to different water types, striped bass are now coming 8 miles from the Charles River Dam upriver to the Watertown Dam, chasing and eating the owlite during the run. And for the last 3 years, fishermen have been catching keeper striped bass under Galen Street in Watertown, which is, and right now it's 28 inches as a keeper striped bass, so significant fish.
Are there eagles on the river?
Eagles, yes.
Yeah, so actually, we'll just do maybe
Good.
2 more questions, and I can talk about the Eagles in 2 seconds, and so can Dan.
Okay.
But we said that we'd be here until 8:30-ish.
Go ahead.
I want to thank you. I want you to run for president.
I have small hands.
To begin in a personal story, my husband and I courted in 1968 on the river behind the library. As he worked in the library, I was a student, and that was a long time ago. We played recorder, and we just got along pretty well with picnics and during our breaks. That was in 1968. Ever since, we've lived somewhere along the river, Cambridge, Watertown, and in Waltham in the past 35 years. I get no more joy than using that path up and down the river, which we do regularly on our bikes. And the transformation over the years, the thing that you need to be thankful for, and all of the people who work with you, is the joy that the people get who are on that river, from the Russian men and women elderly in Watertown. Every day you've seen them. They're playing chess, checkers, knitting, reading, using their walkers, and they're there every day for the whole 4 seasons, enjoying themselves. The cookouts on the weekends, the kids. I mean, I have observed so many people just, joy in their heart to have that river, and who to be thanked, but I just want to say,
Want to do one more?
I wanted to ask David to please share with us your 3 bullet points on...
Oh, you're going to remember them. I've been enjoying this. Let's have Dan talk a little more. I think it was start a project with the world, get angry about something, and there's one other.
The first one is fall in love with the place.
Fall in love with the place.
Fight for it.
And another thing to your point earlier that Dan and I noticed, and I don't know what the solution is, but Dan, with his talks, And maybe when I talk about ospreys, or, by the way, our herring run will be starting sooner. It looks like it could be a couple weeks, it could be that early. But when I talk about that, probably the average age in the audience is around our average age, or maybe a little higher. And I just don't, I'm curious, maybe we can talk about it informally up at the book table. How do we get people out who, I know that environmental sensibility tends to come to you later in life in general, but how do we fire people up? And I think that's one thing that, being in Tucson tomorrow, in the West, I see people getting excited, more young crowds getting excited. How do we do that around here? We mentioned them enjoying the river. How do we get them fighting for the river? I mean, I know you're a unique case. You started when you were really young. So it's just something to think about.
The land trust, I just want to let you all know that we have some green half sheets up at the top which talk about a couple of events we have going on, including a walk at Mount Peak Cemetery on the spring equinox, where we'll look at the eagles that live there at Mount Peak Cemetery, but we're supposed to be quiet about it. We don't want to disturb them. So definitely come and check out our walk. The information is up there. And then the other big event is our major Earth Day cleanup along the Charles. That sees 3,000 people picking up trash and wall definitely removing invasive species from Hopkinton all the way into town. So it's a really great project, wonderful I can be a part of. We do have a stewardship program. Please grab our upcoming events information. You guys, we are just so happy to have you here. We've been trying to have this whole connection happen, and it did. So we would be delighted, David and Dan, if you would wear a hat and t-shirt. What we want to start on our website is you can take a hat and we can get you one of each. So we have a couple different sizes.
I don't get 2 shirts?
Make that work. But we want to have a thing on our website where we'll have photos of people wearing our t-shirts or our hat in exotic places or just in your backyard. So you guys can be our first models, our first people.
Thank you all for coming and braving the storm and finding the building and following all the signs. David will be in the back signing books. If you would like to purchase one, that would be awesome. And thank you all for coming.